Hey, Professor Coons, this is Jacob, and
Sarah.
we will be presenting triggers and views. We will give a brief overview of both, and we will give you some advantages and disadvantages along with the general form, and then we'll follow up on the HR database form. So to get started, Sarah will start with the trigger side, and Sarah, you can take over from here.
Alright, so a trigger is a special type of stored procedure that's designed to perform a sequence of actions on a database table to which the trigger is attached. So triggers and views are available in SQL and TSQL. They're just more commonly used in SQL. So creating a trigger statement, simply enough, is written using the phrase create trigger. So a trigger statement encases either one or many SQL statements, and it will wait until a triggering event occurs, and then the SQL that's wrapped up in those trigger statements will execute. So there are three possible triggering events: the execution of an insert statement, a delete statement, or an update statement. And all three of these have the ability to change the data contained within the database. And these are also known as action queries. Those are typically the ones that will, those are typically the queries that will be the triggering events. So the trigger name is, as we refer to this general format down here, the trigger name is the unique name that you assign to the trigger statement. The trigger action time is the time that you want the triggered action to occur. And this is an interesting aspect about triggers, is that you can either have the trigger occur before or after the triggering event. So in the case of before, the trigger statement will execute before the triggering event, and the result is then stored in memory until the triggering event occurs. So any insertion of one or more rows into the specific table, any deletion, or any update of the columns or rows in the table can cause a trigger to execute. So on, of course, refers to the specified table for which an insert, delete, or update has been applied. So down here is the general format example. So as it applies to the HR database, it would look like this. So you would type in create trigger, and then let's say this is going to be for adding employee data. You would then type in when you want it to happen and what the triggering event will be. So I want this to happen before, and I want it to be an insert statement because I wanted to insert the employee data as I add it to the front end. Then we're going to do on, let's do employee table, and then the last thing will be when I want it to execute. So I want it to do a for each statement. So this for each statement is another interesting aspect about triggers. So there are two types of triggers: row triggers and statement triggers. So in the case of a row trigger, the trigger will only execute when it encounters the insert, delete, or update statement. But for a statement trigger, the trigger will execute multiple times, once for every row in the specified table that is affected by the triggering event. So then you have, you move on to the next portion of the trigger statement, which is starting with the when. So as we had up here, we have this for each statement. It picks up with when. So when is the search condition similar to when you use where in a select from where query. When is the search condition that enables you to specify the circumstances under which a trigger will execute. So when you specify the criteria, if it's met or returns true, the trigger will execute, and if it returns false, it won't. So this capability is similar to Boolean expressions, which greatly increases the usefulness of triggers. So criteria does not always have to return true or false. It can come back with a minimum value, maximum value, a string expression. Those are just to name a few examples. So the general format for this when it comes to the HR database would be for each, and I'm going to use statement in this case because I want it to go by each row. And then we will have when, or actually I don't even need to use when in this example because I don't need to tell it when to, because I've already told it when to execute. So for a sequence of SQL statements, however, you must guarantee atomicity to ensure that the operation is not aborted mid as it is executing. So if the SQL statements blow up in the middle of one of these triggers, it'll leave the database in a disabled state. So you can avoid this issue by using a begin end block that includes the atomic keyword. So it looks like begin atomic, and then you put in all of your SQL statements, and then you close it up with an end statement. Very similar to all other begin-end statements, try-catch statements, if-then statements, and whatnot that we've used in the past. So for this HR database example, we will have, or I'll have probably everything that we've had before. So I'm just going to copy this. This way we can see the whole thing coming together. And we'll add begin atomic and then insert into employee. And I want it to add the employee first name, employee last name, and their hire date. So we'll have employee O name, employee F name, and employee hire date. So basically, as we're right here, I'm just using a basic insert statement, setting it up exactly as you would by adding what the columns I want the information to be inserted into are, and then I'm going to put values. Oops. And I will add the values that I want to be inserted into those columns. Alright, and then I will wrap that up with an end statement. And this is what the whole trigger would look like from start to end as it shows in the HR database. So what this whole trigger does is it executes the triggered statement before the event, but as the trigger statement executes, it will add a new row into the employee data, and the specified columns will be automatically populated with the provided data. So I'm going to pass this one on to Jacob to tell you about views.
Okay, so a very brief overview of views. What is a view? A view is a result set of an SQL statement that creates a virtual table from one or more tables. This is one of the objects you can create in an SQL Server database. There are rows and columns with fields from one or more tables in the database. The views don't store data, but you can query a view like you can a table. Views can combine data from multiple tables using joins, and there are several benefits of using the views, such as the security, performance, consistency, space, and simplicity. These are just some of the main advantages. There are a few more. Let's see. So for security purposes, it restricts access to tables, and it yet allows the users to access non-confidential data views. And Views simplify challenging query logic and calculations by hiding it behind the view's definition. Also, views make it easier to navigate through the database by providing a flattened overview. So there are two main disadvantages when using views in a database management system. The performance of the view can potentially become a disadvantage because a very simple query against a view could turn out to be a very complex job for the database engine. And this is because each time a view is referenced, the query used to define it is going to rerun. And the other disadvantage are the modifications, because not all views support the insert, update, or delete operations. The action statements, they don't all support those. So in order to support these operations, the primary key and required fields must be present in the view. So here's the basic view for creating a view list. It's just like any other query, as you can see here, but there's an extra statement at the top. You just insert create view, view name as, and then you add the commonplace name. And for an example, an HR database example, we do create view employee data as employee data. Oops. And then for the second line, we will select employee first name plus plus employee last name and then we'll do employee hire date. Okay, then after the select statement, we will do from employee and where employee F name between and okay, so this is an example for an HR database, and this is very simple, and it just shows it'll show the employees with the first names between K and R. And that is all we have for you with triggers and views. And thank you for your time, and that's it.